Well, hello. It's Miss Gina. You found me. I wasn't hiding too hard. Oh, I was reading Mrs. Frisby and the Rights of NIMH. And we're on chapter 2. Remember, Miss Frisby was going to go find out about some medicine for her sick son, Timothy. He has pneumonia. So, Mr. Ages, that's who she's going to go find, was a white mouse who lived across the farm and beyond in a white house. Actually, it just says a house. I added white. That was part of a brick wall. Probably not white if it's brick. The wall lined the basement of what had once been a family farmhouse. The farmhouse itself was burned down so many years ago that nobody could remember what it had looked like, nor who had lived there. The basement remained a great square hole in the ground, and in its crumbling walls, protected from the wind and snow, numerous small creatures lived. In summer, there were snakes, dangerous to Mrs. Frisby, but there was no need to worry about them in the winter. Just the same, it was a long, hard journey, and it could be risky unless she was extremely cautious. She had to be careful. It was so far, in fact, that Mrs. Frisby would not ordinarily have set out so late in the day for fear that the wind is blowing, would catch her before she got back. But Timothy obviously could not wait until the next day, so only 5 minutes after she had announced that she must go, she was gone. She left in like 5 minutes. Boop, out. If she had been able to follow her nose, that is, to take the shortest route to where Mr. Ages lived, her journey would have been easy enough. But since that would have led close to the farmhouse and the barn, and since the cat stalked the grounds relentlessly, she had a plot much more roundabout way, circling the whole wide farmyard and sticking to the fringe of the woods. She loped along briskly, she didn't make anything. She's moving in the easy, horse-like canter mice use when they also are trying to cover ground. You know how they run around the walls? Well, she's going around the outer edge, like she'd be around the walls of this place here. And she's going to stick there so that she stays safe from the cat. So, she's almost completely noiseless. Her progress was. She's not making a sound. She chose her path where the earth was bare and where grass grew, and she avoided dead leaves. They make noise when you step on them, which would rustle and crackle even under her small weight. Always she kept an eye out for hiding places, logs, roots, stones, things to scurry under if she met a larger animal who might be unfriendly. For though the cat was number one, there were other things in the woods that chased mice. And as she did all this, she worried about Timothy and hoped that Mr. Ages would know something that would help him. It was more than 2 hours later that she saw she was getting close to the brick wall where he lived. Though her husband had been a great friend to Mr. Ages and had visited him often, Mrs. Frisby herself had been there only once before, and that had been in summer. Still, she remembered the place clearly. It was an odd sort of clearing in the woods. Long ago, when the old house had been lived in, before it had burned, there must have been a wide lawn around it. Over the years, the clearing had grown over with a strange mixture of high, rank grass, tall weeds, berries, and wildflowers. In the summer, it was wild and a beautiful place, bright with blooms and full of smells of blackberry blossoms and purple clover. There were harsher plants as well, spiked jimson weeds and poisonous dark pokeberries, and bees droning everywhere. She probably could hear the buzzing of the bees. But in winter, it had a bleak and almost ghostly look, for the blossoms and the green leaves were gone, and only the dry skeletons of the weeds stood hung with stalks and seed pods that rattled in the wind. It was from these seeds and others from the flowers and roots beneath them that Mr. Ages made the draughts and powders that could sometimes save the sick from dying. The time she had been here before, that was for Timothy too, when he was only a baby, scarcely bigger than a marble. He had wondered while playing with the other children a little way from them, and had been bitten or stung by something poisonous. They did not know what. When the others found him, he lay curled in a ball, paralyzed and scarcely able to breathe. That time her husband, Mr. Frisby, had been alive, and between them taking turns, they had managed to carry Timothy to Mr. Ages's house. It was a sad and frightening journey, and when they arrived, they had been afraid he might already be dead. Mr. Ages looked at him, examined his tongue, felt his pulse, and found a small red lump near his neck. "Spider," he said, "not a black widow, but bad enough." He had forced a few drops of a milky liquid into Timothy's mouth and held him upright so that it could trickle down his throat, for Timothy could not swallow. In a few minutes, his small muscles had unlocked and he was able to move his arms and legs. "He'll be all right," said Mr. Ages, "but weak for a few hours." The trip back home had been a happy one, and the other children were wide-eyed with joy to see Timothy alive. Yet Mrs. Frisby thought that this had been the beginning of his frailness. From that time on, he tended to stumble a little while he walked, especially when he was tired. He never grew as big as He never grew as big or as vigorous as his brother, Martin, but he thought a great deal more, and in that he resembled his father. Now he reached Mr. Ages's house. She reached it. Timothy didn't go this time. A hole in the brick wall where one end of heavy floor beam had once rested. It was about 2 feet below the top of the rail, and one reached it by climbing down a sort of rough stairway of broken brick ends. She knocked on his door, made of a piece of shingle. "Oh, let him be in, please," she thought, but he was not there. He was not. There was no answer, so she sat down to wait on the narrow ledge of the brick in front of his door. Half an hour passed, the sun sinking lower in the west all the time. You know the sun sets in the west. She heard a slight scratching noise up above. And there he came, carrying a cloth sack bulging with some kind of lumpy material. His fur was soft, gray-white, so glossy he seemed almost to glow. Mrs. Frisby had heard that Mr. Ages was not truly a white mouse. That is, he had not been born with white fur, but had turned white from old age. Whether this was so or not, she did not know. Certainly, he seemed very old and very wise, yet he talked just fine, but he walked nimbly enough. "Oh, Mr. Ages, I'm so glad you've come," she said. "I don't suppose you remember me, Mrs. Frisby?" "Of course I remember you. And I was sad to hear about poor Mr. Frisby. How is your young son? Timothy, was it? It's about him I've come to see you. He's taken terribly sick." "Has he? I was afraid he might not turn out to be as strong as the others. I hoped you might be able to help him." "That may be. Come in, please, so I can put down this sack." Mr. Ages' house, somewhat larger than a shoebox, but about the same shape, resembled the house of a hermit. It was bare of furniture except for a bit of bedding in one corner, a stool made of a piece of brick, and another piece of brick worn smooth from the use of a pestle on which he ground all of the medicines. Along one entire wall, arranged neatly in small piles, stood the raw materials he had collected: roots, seeds, dried leaves, pods, strips of bark, and shriveled mushrooms. To this row he now added the contents of his sack. It held a number of small plants, all of them the same kind, with stringy, and there's a picture. Told you there's very few drawings in here. And they're not really well, they're drawings more like sketches more than an illustration with colors and, you know, the pastels or the bright colors. They're just black and white. It was stringy roots and dark veined green leaves that look like mint. "Pipsissewe," said Mr. Ages. "Botanically, Chimaphila umbellata. It stays green all winter and makes a very useful spring tonic. Most people use only the leaves, but I have found the roots even more effective." He arranged the plants in an orderly pile. "But that's not what you're here for. What's wrong with young Timothy?" "He has a very high fever. He's delirious. I don't know what to do." "How high?" "So high that he feels burning hot to the touch, runs with perspiration, and yet shivers with cold at the same time." "Keep him wrapped up in a blanket." "I do." "And his pulse? So fast that you cannot tell one heartbeat from the next." "His tongue? So coated that it looks purple." "How does he breathe?" "He breathes very rapidly and the air rasps in his chest. He said at first that he could not get his breath, but he does not cough." "No." "But does he not cough?" "No." "He has pneumonia," said Mr. Ages. "I have some medicine that will help him, but the most important thing is to keep him warm, and he must stay in bed." He went to the back of his house, and from a ledge formed by a projecting brick, he took 3 packets of medicine powders, neatly wrapped in white paper. "Give me one of these tonight." "Don't give it to me. Give it to Timothy." "Give him one of these tonight. Mix it in water and make him drink. If he is still delirious, hold his nose and pour it down his throat. Give him the second one tomorrow morning and the third the next morning." Mrs. Frisby took the packages. "Will he get better?" she asked, dreading to hear the answer. "He will get better this time. His fever will be less on the second day and gone the third. After he has taken all the medicine, that does not mean he will have recovered. His lungs will still be terribly weak and sensitive. If he gets the least bit cold or breathes cold air, even a breath or two, the pneumonia will surely come back worse than before. And the second time, he may not recover. This will be true for at least 3 weeks, and more likely a month." And after that, even after that, he should be careful, though we may hope by then the weather will be warmer. By now, the sun was getting low in the west, settling in the high mountains beyond the woods. Mrs. Frisby thanked Mr. Ages and set out for home as quickly as she could. That was page 17. And next time we'll be on The Crow and the Cat will be our next chapter. What do you think about that? So I'll see you next time. I hope you read more in 2024. This was Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. It had a Newbery Award for this book for literacy. It had literary merit, and he was recognized for it. And I want you to grow your brain. And as always, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.